I love the Yakuza games. Like many people, I started with Yakuza 0 because it's usually the game everyone recommends to newcomers. And honestly, when I first saw Kiryu, I wasn't sure if I was going to like him. He barely showed any emotion, rarely said more than what was necessary, and the opening of the game painted him as this intimidating Yakuza willing to beat people up over a debt. Not exactly the kind of protagonist I immediately get attached to, but a few hours later, I was completely sold. The contrast between the serious crime drama and the absurd side content made Kiryu incredibly endearing. One moment he's uncovering a massive conspiracy involving the empty lot, and the next he's helping a dominatrix become more assertive or obsessing over pocket circuit racing. And by the end of Yakuza 0, Kiwami was already waiting in my Steam library. I wanted to see what happened next, so I went on to play Kiwami immediately, then Kiwami 2, then 3, 4, 5. And somewhere along the way, Kiryu stopped feeling like a video game protagonist. He started feeling like an old friend. That's what makes Kazuma Kiryu such a fascinating character. Over the course of nearly 20 years of games, we don't just watch him win fights or save the day. We watch him grow older, lose people he loves, and struggle to move on from his past. And more importantly, we watch him try over and over again to leave the Yakuza life behind. The funny thing is that anyone who has played more than one Yakuza game knows that Kiryu can't seem to escape Kamurocho, that no matter how far he runs, his past always catches up to him. And for a long time, I believed that too. But after finishing Infinite Wealth, I realized something. Kamurocho isn't what keeps Kiryu trapped, nor is it the Tojo clan or the Yakuza. We are. Because the tragedy of Kazuma Kiryu isn't that he spent his life trying to leave the Yakuza behind. It's that he became so beloved that nobody would let him. Not the characters, not the writers, and certainly not the players, including me. Because if I'm being completely honest, every single time Kiryu came back after retiring, I was happy to see him. Even when I knew he probably deserved a break. Even when I knew his story was over. It made me wonder if Kiryu's greatest burden was never his past, but his success. And if you think about it, it makes sense. For a long time, I believed that Kamurocho was what kept Kiryu trapped. After all, every time he tried to leave his old life behind, something would drag him back. His past always seemed to find him. But when you look closely, Kiryu was never really trapped by Kamurocho itself. He was trapped by the people in it. You could argue that Kiryu could have simply looked the other way whenever trouble happened. But that's not who Kiryu is. And it's one of the main reasons he's such a beloved character. He's not your average Yakuza. He's not even the terrifying criminal that his reputation inspires people to imagine. Behind that stoic expression, I believe Kiryu is a man who desperately wants something surprisingly ordinary. A family. And by that, I mean a place where he belongs. That desire explains so much about Kiryu's life. He grew up as an orphan. He joined the Yakuza because of the bonds he formed at Sunflower and because he viewed Kazuma as a father figure. Even his loyalty to Nishikiyama came from that same place. Kiryu has always been searching for family, whether it's one he was born into or one he creates himself. After the climax at the top of Millennium Tower, he's lost almost everything. He lost Nishikiyama, Yumi, and Kazuma. Three of the most important people in his life are gone in a matter of days after Hiro gained his freedom. And as far as I recall, it's the only time you see Kiryu completely broken. Seeing a force of nature like Kiryu just giving up was heartbreaking. His voice didn't carry rage, but resignation. And honestly, it's understandable. He wasn't fighting for the future of the Tojo clan. He didn't even care about becoming a chairman. He was trying to protect the people he loved. And he failed. He lost the people he cared about, his connection to the clan, and arguably even his reason to keep going. The story of the Dragon of Dojima could have ended right there. But that day reminded him that there was still someone who needed him, someone who shared his tragedy. Haruka. Kiryu lost one family to the tragedy, but gained a new one. She gave him a new reason to live, and more importantly, a new dream. For the first time, Kiryu considered the possibility of a peaceful life, a normal life, one far away from the Yakuza. And that's what makes the rest of his story so tragic. Because every time Kiryu gets close to that life, he has to give it up for someone else. Kiryu can't leave the Yakuza behind because there are still people inside it that he cares about. If Daigo is in danger, or if Majima needs help, he'll come back. And that's where his greatest strength becomes his greatest weakness. Kiryu has always been honest. Not honest in the sense that he tells everyone every detail of his life, but honest in the sense that he never pretends to be something he's not. He doesn't run from responsibility. He doesn't abandon people. And because of that, he can never fully detach himself from the consequences of his past, especially when it comes to Daigo. Kiryu practically shoved Daigo back into the role of future chairman. Whether he intended to or not, he helped place that burden on his shoulders. So every time Daigo finds himself in trouble, Kiryu feels responsible. He is trapped by duty and guilt, but most of all, he's trapped by the fact that he cares too much. For the first few games, that explanation worked perfectly. Of course Kiryu kept coming back, how could he not? Every return felt like the natural result of his character. The story wasn't forcing him back into the spotlight. Kiryu was choosing to carry burdens that nobody else could. But eventually, something started to change. With every new game, Kiryu found himself pulled into a new crisis. And after a while, I felt like the people inside the story weren't the only ones who couldn't let Kiryu go. The franchise couldn't either. Don't get me wrong, I couldn't do it myself. I watched him grow from a hot-headed kid in Yakuza 0 into a man willing to sacrifice everything for his family. I watched him survive betrayals, political conspiracies, and countless attempts on his life. Unlike a lot of long-running protagonists, Kiryu wasn't just this cool guy who would just give us cool moments even after growing old. The franchise lets you share Kiryu's best and worst moments, his cool moments and his goofy ones. And because of that, I became attached to him. When I think of Yakuza, I immediately think of the Dragon of Dojima. He's become the face of the franchise, the brand itself. And that's exactly what created the problem. Because every time Kiryu tried to pass the torch, neither the audience nor the series seemed ready to let him. Yakuza 4 introduced new protagonists. Yakuza 5 expanded the idea even further. But none of them truly replaced Kiryu. Instead, they became important additions to the cast while Kiryu remained at the center of everything. It's not that fans hated successors, quite the opposite. People loved Akiyama and Saejima. But liking a new protagonist isn't the same thing as wanting Kiryu gone. And I think the writers understood that. That's why even after years of trying to prepare the audience for a future beyond Kiryu, they still struggled to fully move on from him. The result was a strange cycle. Kiryu would retire, everyone would say goodbye, and then he would come back. And every single time, fans would cheer, myself included. We always look for another reason to bring him back. In a way, we built the very cage that he spent his entire life trying to escape. And that's what makes Yakuza 6 so interesting to look back on. For a while, it felt like the end. The very last chapter of Kiryu's book. And to me, it was perfectly fine. Sure, I was sad. I shed more than just a few tears watching Kiryu walk away into the distance. But I also understood why it had to happen. Kiryu spent years trying to escape the shadow of the Dragon of Dojima. Every time he thought he had finally left that life behind, his reputation dragged him back in. So in a strangely poetic way, the only way for Kiryu to be free was to stop being Kazuma Kiryu. To protect Haruka and the other children from the orphanage, he had to erase himself. It's not a happy ending, but at least we got an ending that gave us some closure. Until Yakuza 7 happened. To be fair, I think Ichiban was probably the best successor Kiryu could have asked for. The easiest thing the writers could have done would have been to create another stoic badass and call it a day. Instead, they gave us someone completely different. Ichiban isn't a one-man army. And unlike Kiryu, his first instinct isn't to shoulder every burden by himself. He relies on people, he wears his emotions on his sleeve. He's loud, awkward, optimistic, and sometimes a complete idiot. And somehow it works. Because despite all those differences, Ichiban shares the qualities that actually matter. He's honest, empathetic, and just wants to help people. He's different enough to stand on his own, but similar enough to feel like the natural successor to Kiryu. The fact that he shares Nishikiyama's voice actor is just cherry on top. For a moment, it really felt like the torch had finally been passed. We had a new protagonist, a new city, a new cast, a new era. The future of Yakuza had finally arrived. They even changed the localized English name. But Kiryu still showed up. I loved the fan service, but it did make me wonder, why is he here? Ichiban was already carrying the game perfectly fine. The series had already proven that it could survive without Kiryu, so I couldn't help but wonder if there was any real reason to bring him back, and if 7 was the game trying to move forward. Gaiden felt like the series admitting that it couldn't quite stop looking back. Because Gaiden is in a bit of a weird spot if you think about it. It didn't need to exist. It answered a question that didn't need answering. What happened to Kiryu between 6 and 7? And the answer is just depressing. Kiryu got what he wanted. He's no longer Kazuma Kiryu, he's no longer the Dragon of Dojima. As far as the world is concerned, he's gone, but he's miserable. The man spent his entire life searching for a family only to end up in a position where he can't even speak to the people he loves. He can watch them from afar, protect them from the shadow, make sure they're safe, but he can't actually be part of their lives. That's just cruel, especially for someone like Kiryu. Then the game hits you with that scene. You know the one. The video taken from his grave. For most of the franchise, Kiryu is practically indestructible. No matter what life throws at him, he just keeps moving forward. But during that particular scene, he completely breaks down. And honestly, if that scene didn't get at least a little reaction out of you, I don't know what will. Because for once, the Dragon of Dojima wasn't standing in front of us. There was no legend, no larger-than-life hero, just a lonely old man who misses his family. This is something we tend to forget, but it makes you realize that Kiryu's greatest burden was never Kamurocho or the Tojo clan, or even the Daidoji. It was being Kazuma Kiryu. Because by that point, Kiryu had become more than a character. He had become a legend, and legends are hard to let go of. That's what makes everything that comes after feel so different. Because once you've seen that version of Kiryu in Gaiden, it's hard to go back to thinking of him the same way. He isn't just the Dragon of Dojima anymore. He isn't even just a retired legend the series keeps bringing back for nostalgia. He's just tired. And then comes Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. And if 7 was about passing the torch, Infinite Wealth felt more like accepting that time doesn't stop for anyone. Kiryu comes back once again as a second protagonist, but unlike the indestructible figure we spent decades playing as, he's older, weaker, sick. For the first time, the series doesn't just hint at mortality, it shows it in your face, and it's uncomfortable, because Kiryu has always been the exception, the guy who gets back up, the one who survives everything, the guy who never really feels human in the same way everyone else does. Infinite Wealth just strips that away, and what's left is just a man who is running out of time. At first, it almost feels strange, like the game is pulling you away from the usual Yakuza energy and forcing you to sit with something heavier. Because Ichiban's side of the story still feels bright in a way. It has the energy of a summer vacation adventure. There's that classic optimism he carries with him everywhere. But the moment Kiryu's story takes over, everything slows down. It becomes something closer to a farewell tour than an adventure. And I think that's when the game really starts to hit. We get to look back at the life he lived, the people he met, the choices he made, and the regrets he still carries with him. We get to see the world he left behind moving on without him. That's where the emotional weight really starts to settle in. For the first time, Kiryu isn't faced with a problem that can be solved with his fists, and the game doesn't shy away from that. It directly confronts the idea that even someone like Kiryu has an ending. That's where the cancer diagnosis hits so hard, not because it's shocking in a plot sense, but because it feels final. Like a reminder that no matter how strong you are, your body eventually catches up with you. And that's when something really interesting happens. The question stops being, can Kiryu survive this, and becomes, should Kiryu still be here at all? And I think that Infinite Wealth feels like the game that finally asks us to let him go. Once you step back and look at the full picture, Infinite Wealth doesn't really feel like just another sequel. It feels like the final conversation the series is having with Kiryu, and with us. The game becomes something more than just a story about aging. It becomes a story about acceptance, not just Kiryu's, but ours too. The story has to move on. And deep down, we've always known that. But knowing it and accepting it are two very different things. That's where the Daidoji faction starts to feel strangely symbolic. On the surface, they are just another shadow organization controlling Kiryu's movements, forcing him to live under a false identity, keeping him out of sight. But in a way, they feel like the part of the system that keeps Kiryu suspended in time. Not allowed to fully live, but not allowed to truly die either. And maybe that's the same space we put him in as players, because we never really wanted to lose Kiryu, but we also never wanted to see him replaced. So instead, we kept him in a strange middle ground, forever important, forever present, forever returning. And that's the real tragedy. Not that Kiryu couldn't escape Kamurocho or leave the Yakuza behind, but that he became so successful, so iconic, so deeply loved that he could never really be allowed to live at all. We wanted one more appearance, one more goodbye, one more moment with the Dragon of Dojima. And the series gave us exactly that, over and over again, until even farewell stopped feeling like an ending. And I think that's why Infinite Wealth hits so hard when it finally slows everything down and asks us to sit with Kiryu as he is now. Not the legend, nor the unstoppable force. Just a man who has lived too long inside his own myth. A man who is finally running out of time. And it forces us to confront something we've been avoiding for years. That Kiryu's story was never just about him trying to leave the Yakuza behind. It was about whether we could accept to let him go. And for the first time, the answer isn't given to us. It's left in our hands.